Hi everybody, this is part 2 of the ICECROWN Citadel First Look series. We're going to be going into the Plague Wing and the Blood Wing for this video. It's going to be Festergut, Rotface, Professor Putricide, the Council, and Blood Queen Lana'thel. The next video will be Dreamwalker, Sindragosa, and then the Lich King. And we'll just do those three for the last video because the Lich King takes a lot of time to go over. So yeah, the first video is up on YouTube, so check that out if you haven't. These are a lot of fun. If you want to come, we do them at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern, tomorrow, Thursday, or today when this video comes out. So come by. They're a lot of fun. Okay, so we're going to be using Tankspot videos. We've always been using Tankspot videos for these. It's really important to not use like private server stuff or retail stuff because I like using primary sources ideally if you can for these. While a lot of that stuff, the Peace server stuff is super great and helpful, using the original guides like these, I think, are the way to go so that we can all learn the way that they did, and then we can iterate from there. Let's get into the first one, Festergut. The first 2 bosses of the Plague Wing are required in order to access Professor Putricide, which is the final boss of the Plague Wing. We don't know when ICC is, sorry. We're going to be doing Festergut first. They are 2 identical-ish mobs that you need to kill, and then you turn a lever, this lever actually right here, you turn it, and it pipes gas or slime into Putricide's room, and then that opens the gate and blah, blah, blah. This is kind of something that Blizzard ended up doing a lot more of over time, where it's like, let me introduce you to the mechanics in certain fights, and then later fights, you kind of combine a lot of the mechanics into one, and then, but you've already got some knowledge of how this stuff works. You know what I mean? They do this a lot in retail these days, where it's like, things work like this, things work like that, and then they use a bunch of them at the end. And this, I think, is definitely one of those cases. Okay, so we're going to talk about Festergut first. I'll let the video play and we can start talking about it.
The Festergut encounter is relatively simple in terms of the complexity of the mechanics. However, because of the shortened rage timer and the large amounts of damage that the raid and tanks take, the fight is essentially a gear check. Once you initiate the pull, the room will be filled with a gas cloud that will do around 4,500 damage to everyone in the raid every 2 seconds. Your range should be spread out in a semicircle around the boss, making sure that they are all at least 8 yards away from each other so multiple people aren't hit with vile gas at the same time. Vile gas is basically a conflagrate type debuff that causes the player targeted and anyone within 8 yards of them to become disoriented and do damage to everyone around them for 6 seconds.
So, if I recall, this strategy may end up getting changed. There might be 1 range stack and 1 melee stack, and then there's like, how many of those spore things go out? Malleable spores? 3 of them. So it's probably this way. So you do 2 range stacks and you do a melee stack. You need the raid split up so that you soak all of these, which, if I recall correctly, gives you like some type of buff or slow something, right? Does anybody remember exactly how it works?
Within 8 yards of them to become disoriented and do damage to everyone around them for 6 seconds.
It gives you the inoculation. Right. If you don't get inoculated enough, when he does the thing, you die.
Approximately every 30 seconds, Festergut will cast Inhale Blight. This will reduce the damage done by the gas cloud by 1/3, but will also cause him to gain a stacking buff that increases his damage and his attack speed by 30%. As Festergut's stacks increase, it may be advisable to rotate cooldowns on the tanks as needed because Festergut will be hitting very hard by the time he does his 3rd Inhale Blight cast.
Okay, so here's more spores. So the raid is gonna...
Approximately every 35 seconds, Festergut will give 3 random raid members a debuff called Gas Spore. After 12 seconds, the spore will detonate and give all raid members within 8 yards a debuff doing 2,000 damage every second for 6 seconds. Whoever survives this debuff...
This is gonna be a really fun fight to heal. It's a lot of front-loaded healing, followed by some healing getting easier and easier, but the tank healing getting harder and harder. And then it resets.
Will gain another debuff called Inoculated, which reduces their shadow damage taken by 25% and can stack up to 3 times.
This could be a good druid fight niche.
Whoever gets the gas spore debuff will have an animation that looks exactly like the spores from Lana'thel floating over their head. It is imperative that everyone gets under these spores before they detonate and then immediately spreads out to their original position. It is vital that every single person in the raid gets inoculated, including the tanks. Because you have 12 seconds to get to the nearest spore, under normal circumstances, people with gas spores should never have to move. But if there's no spore in melee, it is vital that one goes there. Or, if two spores are right next to each other, they need to spread out because you do not want the detonation debuff to stack. Because even though the damage over time debuff can stack, it will not grant you multiple stacks of inoculated. It'll only grant one, even if you have 2 or 3 stacks of the dot.
Here's Pungent Blight.
Around 20
Okay.
seconds after the third inhale, Festergut will use Pungent Blight, which does 50,000 shadow damage to everyone in the raid. This ability removes all stacks of inoculated, and it also resets Festergut's stacks of inhale, and releases the gaseous blight back in.
Okay, so the fight is kind of this dance of gas, which I know everybody loves hearing about gas dances. I know I do. The room is filled with gas, and over time he inhales it and inhales it and inhales it. As he's inhaling it, the amount of damage that you're taking goes down because there's less gas in the room, but he's doing more because he's getting stronger from the gas. And then once he's full up of gas and there's no more gas in the room, he'll fart it out, doing a gajillion damage, unless you have a inoculation spore stack that you've ideally been getting on the raid during this phase. So the goal is kind of like position the raid so that everybody gets spores. The raid is healing through the gas. You're healing the tank. And it's kind of like the raid healing goes down, the tank healing goes up, and then boom, he farts. Everybody takes damage unless you've been inoculated, and everything resets again. So it's this little like back and forth type thing.
Into the room. By the time Pungent Blight is cast, everyone in the raid should have 3 stacks of inoculated, and therefore only take around 13,000 damage when it is cast.
Yeah.
If a player does not have 3 stacks of inoculated, they should use their own defensive cooldowns, or have a healer use a cooldown on them if one is available. Finally, every 10 seconds, Festergut will put a debuff on the tank called Gastric Bloat.
This is DPS over here.
Which increases their damage done by 10% for 100 seconds and stacks up to 10 times. If the tank reaches 10 stacks, it will explode, doing 50,000 nature damage to everyone nearby. If this happens, your raid will wipe. To prevent this, you need to have at least 2 tanks for this encounter. Your second...
So what Niche is alluding to is that, like, depending on what Blizzard does with the stacks of buffs, there's a buff that stacked over time during ICC. It was like 5% at a time, up to 30%, and it increased your HP, your damage, and your amount of healing done. And so at 0%, the stuff's going to be harder, right? And depending on your kill times, you could one-tank this, but it seems unlikely that you can one-tank it. If Pally can remove the stacks with Bubble or Bop, then yeah, you probably could single-tank it. I don't know the answer to that, Leia, but that's a good option. Similar to like Gormok or whatever. But we'll see what happens. Ideally, you one-tank it. That would be nice. But at 0%, who knows what the DPS check is? You definitely don't want that. And if he's tauntable, then... Is he tauntable? I don't know if he's tauntable. If he's tauntable, then you don't have to worry too much about 2 tanks building threat. It does look like he might not be tauntable. I don't know. We'll see.
Will wipe. To prevent this, you need to have at least 2 tanks for this encounter. Your second tank should taunt the boss once your first tank has 9 stacks. The first tank should then switch to a DPS stance or turn off Righteous Fury because otherwise they might pull aggro.
So he's inhaling the gas. There's like one bit of gas left.
The other tank will be only seconds away from taking a 10 stack of their debuffs.
So if you only have 2 tanks, then you only have, 19 applications of that debuff possible, or 18, before you wipe. No buffs. I mean, I don't think anybody... I think everybody's okay with buffs. Is removal with bubble? Okay. Well then, if it's removal with the bubble, then it's probably a one-tankable fight. But I don't know. I don't know what the speed with which that debuff is applied. It seems pretty fair to assume it'll be fine. The second tank's at 3 stacks right now. Our DPS will be a lot higher. If it's removable with bubble, then that's what? 200 seconds. That's 3 and a bit minutes. That seems unlikely the fight's going to be longer than that. All right, so there's the fart, but they ideally all had the inoculation, so no worries there. They've got a couple dead.
Thank you for watching this movie. As
really
always,
not
feel
too
free
difficult to
ask
fight.
questions
It's just a bit of a dance on positioning. Shouldn't be too bad.
Add suggestions either in the comments
Enrage
section
in 20
on YouTube
seconds? Oh, that's interesting.
or in the thread.
What's the enrage timer to begin with? 5 minutes? Jesus. It's a gear check? Yeah. I think this will be one of the easier fights with our DPS and gear levels taken into account. And yeah, Bora, it is normal. Let's look at what the mechanic is that gets added for Heroic. The big addition in Heroic is Malleable Goo. Putricide periodically flings goo from his balcony as he watches the fight. Tanks, melee, and ranged are all targets for Malleable Goo. If players are in the blast radius, they will take damage and suffer 12-second, 250% attack speed casting debuff. If DPS are debuffed, you will have difficulty beating the enrage timer. If healers are debuffed, the tank will probably die. If you tank Festergut on the south side of the room, you will have more time to react to Malleable Goo. The target of the goo is indicated by a small green puddle on the floor. It's difficult but not impossible to see when the gaseous blight is at full strength. It is also obscured by the player's polygons and by Festergut's feet. So it's just something you have to dodge. The blast radius is larger than the puddle. There will be times when the group is grouped up for gas spore at the same time Malleable Goo. Okay, so you have to move if you're stacked for the spore and there's a Malleable Goo heading towards you. Good to know. How long does the Malleable Goo last? 12 seconds? Okay. Yeah, this doesn't seem like too difficult of a one. It could just be left or right and move if it's going for melee. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is probably one of those things also where you plan movement ahead of time. So it's like, okay, we're all stacked for spore. If a Malleable Goo is going to hit us, we are all going to go to the right. Or all going to go to the left. Vile gas? That's inflicts a vile plague in targeted area, inflicting damage every 2 seconds. The plague causes the infected targets to vomit uncontrollably, inflicting damage to nearby allies. Does not affect... Yeah, this is why you spread out outside of the stack point when you want the... whatchamacallit. That's why you saw everybody spreading out until they collapsed for the spore. So I guess the vile gas doesn't go out while the spore is up, I would hope. Or that would get complicated. Yeah, I don't know. Either way, it seems pretty obvious like how to... Oh, interesting. Festergut has an enrage timer of 5 minutes, which is rather short. In 25 player, this means the raid has to do 135k DPS overall. In 10 player, it's 32,000. Depending on raid size and numbers of healers and tanks, the following table yields the average DPS needed per damage dealer, assuming 2 tanks with 2k DPS in 10 player and 2 tanks with 3k in 25 player. So, can everybody do 10k DPS for the duration of the fight? I think you're probably fine. This also seems like one that you could drop a healer or 2 on, depending. So long as you're not taking a bunch of avoidable damage, you could probably drop a healer pretty easy here and go down to 4. I mean, they're using, it would be 9.3. So they're using 2 tanks, 5 healers. I think it's gonna be fine. Do you not get a buff also, or no? Do you get a buff that increases damage done from the spore, or is it just inoculates you? It doesn't give you any buff. Okay, no DPS buff. Okay, yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem. I think this is one that people will likely get early once they understand how to stack and stuff. Okay, that was Festergut. Now we're going to get into Rotface. Again, Rotface and Festergut are 2 of the identical bosses. One is orange, one is green. And you need to kill both of them in order to access Putricide. Putricide's going to be a very fun fight. I'm very excited about it.
Hello and welcome to the Tankspot ICECROWN CITADEL raid guide. My name is Aliena, and in this video I'll cover everything you need to know about the normal mode 25-man version of the Rotface encounter that's unlocked after defeating Deathbringer Sourfang. Rotface has 36 million health and is located in a circular chamber with pipes going all around the outsides of the room. He's pretty much a tank and spank fight with 3 twists to him that give him a bit of a Grobulus Hagen Nexramas flavor. A setup of 2 tanks, 6 to 7 healers, and 16 to 17 DPS is recommended for this encounter.
So you're probably running 5 healers. A lot of these, we talked about this last time, but a lot of these strategies use more healers than are necessarily required these days. Healers are generally better. Raid cooldowns are a little bit more planned out. DPS are better about using health stones and self-saves and stuff. And yeah, I think the computers go a long way into being able to avoid stuff.
To start out the fight, your main tank should run into the middle of the room and turn the boss 180 degrees, with the rest of your raid staying close behind Rotface's back.
Mine was a Del too.
Once he's turned, the raid should spread out in an area right behind and next to Rotface, ideally leaving the area right around your main tank open. This is because Rotface uses an ability called Slime Spray, which is a 1.5 second cast and then a 5-second channeled AoE nature damage spell. He will pick a random raid member to cast it on, turn towards that person, and then channel Slime Spray, which hits for about 7k damage per second in a frontal cone.
So the main mechanic of the fight is what's going on over here, for what it's worth, which we'll get into, but just keep an eye on what's going on with these slimes.
While he doesn't hit particularly hard, you do want to avoid that extra damage on your tank if at all possible. It's incredibly easy to predict what area is going to be affected by Slime Spray since Rotface turns before he even starts channeling. Everyone in the affected area simply needs to move out of it. Now, secondly, what I'd like to explain is the environmental twist and the reason you're all stacked up in the very middle of this large room. The room is actually split into 4 quarters. At any given time during this encounter, 1/4 of the room is going to be covered by green slime that deals around 5k nature damage every second and reduces movement speed by 25% for 5 seconds to anyone standing in it. The slime will randomly cover all 4 areas one after another,
but
never the same one twice until all 4 have been covered at least once. That pattern repeats throughout the entire fight. It's easy to see where the next ooze flood will take place since the pipes open a little prior to that. The majority of your raid will never have to worry about this unless they get hit with a debuff that's called mutated infection.
Okay, so what she's saying is there's 4, quadrants, and on the outside of this room, each quadrant can light up with ooze. And so at any one time, each one of these will be lit up. So you just have to avoid running into it, which you will never have to run into it so long as you're in the center of the room, because within this little gray, star shape, circle shape, the ooze doesn't hit unless you have to run out for whatever reason, which she will explain here in a second.
Mutated infection is a disease that lasts 12 seconds, deals around 4,000 damage every second, and will reduce healing received by the target by 50%. This is approximately cast every 15 seconds, but seems to speed up as the fight progresses.
Connor, shut up.
When the debuff runs out or is cleansed, a small mutant slime baby will pop out at the affected target.
A small mutant slime baby.
Target's feet, which is where your off-tank comes into play. People that get the debuff always need to run to the off-tank so you can pick up the slime offspring. Once 2 of these little slimes...
Okay, so she's kind of explaining it, but it isn't necessarily clear. So there's big slimes and little slimes, okay? The little slime cannot be slowed. The big slime can be slowed. A big slime is created when 2 little slimes are next to each other, and they will combine into one mob and become a big slime. So the goal is to make a big slime by having 2 little slimes combine, and then your tank picks it up and kites it around the room. Then whenever people get this debuff that has a slime on them, they run towards the big slime, which has an AoE damage effect. With their little slime chasing them, the little slime touches the big slime, they combine into a bigger slime, and then the person runs back while the tank is still kiting this slime. Now, the complicating factor is that they have an aura of damage, so you want to make sure that you're not next to the big slime for longer than half a second. And 2, this ooze around the room that will slow and do damage to the tank. This big slime cannot reach the tank because it will truck him hard. So you just got to kite him around the room. And the reason he kites him around the room and not like through the center is because of the damaging aura. So I don't know what the range of the radiating aura is, but incentivizes you to be outside of the stack.
Come together, i.e. after 2 infections pop.
So here she goes.
Merge into a big slime that hits exceptionally hard and is advised to be kited along the outsides of the room, but keeping the ooze flood pattern in mind. Every person that gets a debuff after the big ooze has emerged needs to move into the kiting path between the off-tank and the big slime to ensure that the big slime is close enough to absorb the little one.
There you go. So now it's absorbing.
The big slime continues absorbing little players.
Okay. Unstable ooze explosion. So the big slime can absorb 5 little oozes, and then it pops and does a bunch of damage.
To power himself up, and once it absorbs 5 little oozes, it will cast a spell called Unstable Ooze Explosion. This ability has a slow cast and air travel time, but basically launches around 10 missiles into the air that are aimed at random players, or rather the ground that they stand on. They also deal considerable damage in a 6-yard range when they hit anyone, and the damage stacks. So once you see the emote, every raid member needs to move out of the middle of the room to keep it free before the bombs land.
So as the slime is popping, everybody runs to the outside of the room, away from where the green's gonna get pushed. And then the AoE goes out, they spread out, AoE goes out, and then they run back in. You don't want to be all in the center when the big ooze slime explodes, because as the slimes hit everybody from the explosion, it's just gonna pop.
Once it explodes, the whole game starts over. Merge 2 slimes,
and that's it. You just keep going.
Out 5 times, move out of the middle, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, depending on how many people move out, maybe it makes sense for some of the melee to stay in if they want to parse or whatever. But, you know, you're going to have to be nice to each other, and you're going to have to take turns and decide, okay, this week I'm going to stay in, next week you can stay in.
The pace of debuffs and oozes spawning seems to pick up during the battle, so ideally you want to assign someone to dispel it when the raid member is close to your off-tank, so the affected person does not have to stand around the whole 12 seconds. Key to this fight is your kiter, sufficient DPS,
there it goes, the slime
and relying on
popped.
people with the debuff to move to the right spot at the right time without getting irritated by ooze flood. Good luck!
Good luck. She ended it. Okay, so there you go. And he dies. Trauma. Okay, so that is Rotface. That fight also doesn't seem too hard once your tanks figure out how to kite around the room, because it's going to take some specific positioning to get everything set up so that it's kited well, and then your people know how to drop the ooze off so that it gets absorbed and then, you know, back in. Yeah, the off tank takes an important role. Whichever your tanks you feel like can pick things up a bit faster might be the one that you want to go with. Although both of your tanks should be able to do it. It's a cool little fight. I really like the slime mechanic. I don't love the ooze just popping up around the room. Best often here is a DK with a grip. Yeah, you could grip stuff towards you, and chains is also really nice. So that was Rotface. Now we get into Professor Putricide. This is one of probably the 3 hardest fights in here. Everyone's very excited about this fight. I don't blame them. It's a cool fight. It is the final fight of the Plague Wing. It might be the 2nd hardest fight in here. It's also one of the fights that I think is the tightest DPS-wise, heal-wise. It's a bit of an asynchronous fight with some weird, you know, vehicle mechanic stuff. You know, it accelerates very quickly. It is one of the fights of all time. It's very cool, but you might want to kill each other by the end of it. It's a long one.
On Raid Guide. My name is Darksand, and in this video, I will be showing you our strategy for the 25-man version of Professor Putricide.
This is also one of those fights that if you have an A-bomb driver that doesn't know what they're doing, and you like someone that you selected to be the A-bomb driver, maybe have them hop on to retail or something so they can learn the moves and like how it works. Like, I'll make a video on how to do the A-bomb thing, but the A-bomb driver isn't somebody that you want to fuck this up, because that's not the hard part. The A-bomb can only do so much. It's the easy part. The hard part is everything else. So you don't want to be like, oh, I should have done the thing on the A-bomb. I'm sorry I didn't. It's like, just get it right every time.
The final boss in the Plague Works. If you'd like more information about this encounter, or would like to learn more about downloading this movie, click more info on the movie information box on YouTube to head directly to Tankspot. This is the...
Okay, before we get into it, ICC also has this mechanic that we don't know what's going to happen, but it ceases unsuccessful attempts until retreat 8 of 10. So the final bosses of each wing, and the wings came out over time. This was the 2nd wing to come out after the first 4. There are limited attempts on these final bosses, and if you run out of attempts, the bosses despawn and that's it. Do you get attempts on normal? I don't know, actually. I thought it was a heroic only mechanic. Normal didn't have attempts? All right. Heroic's going to be what you care about. But yeah, here we go.
First of 4 encounters in the instance, which will share attempts as later gates become unlocked.
Normal had attempts until heroic came out? Okay.
As of right now, however, you are limited to only 10 attempts. Professor Putricide is a 3-phase fight. 3 tanks will be required for this strategy in Phase 3. We also use 6 healers for this encounter. Phase 1 will last until 80%. The first ability he will use is Slime Puddle, which will spawn a growing green cloud under 2 random raid members. 1 player, preferably one of the Oz tanks as they have very little to do until Phase 3, will run to the table and drink a potion to become an A-bomb. The A-bomb will deal constant AoE damage to the raid, but it is also the only way to prevent the puddles from completely filling the room, as the A-bomb's primary ability is to drink the puddles.
Okay, so I don't know if you saw a second ago. Over time, Putricide will create these puddles in the ground. Someone's going to be assigned to run to the back of the room here, use it, do a little thingy, drink a potion, and then you turn into this massive A-bomb. And then the A-bomb runs around and drinks the puddles, and that stops them from building up and wiping the raid. It's also important not to drink them all too fast. When you drink the puddle, you get energy. But if you drink the puddle too fast, the puddle will despawn and you'll be out of something that will give you energy. But like the puddle gets bigger and bigger over time unless you eliminate it by drinking the whole thing. So you want to like let it grow, drink a little, let it grow, drink a little, let it grow, and like manage that while eliminating some of the other ones so that you have like a constant source of energy. And the important thing about the energy is you can use his abilities like these guys are saying, which is slowing the slime, which is really important for what we're about to talk about. There's a bit of a nuance in how much ooze to drink, how quickly, because you don't want to do it too fast.
You'll spawn a growing green cloud under 2 random raid members. One player, preferably one of the Oz tanks as they have very little to do until Phase 3, will run to the table and drink a potion to become an A-bomb. The A-bomb will deal constant AoE damage to the raid, but it is also the only way to prevent the puddles from completely filling the room, as the A-bomb's primary ability is to drink the puddles. Be careful not to drink them too fast, as you need to let them get big enough to get at least 13 drinks off in order to help counter Putricide's next ability.
13 drinks.
Putricide will cast Unstable Experiment right before he is about to spawn one of 2 types of ads. They always alternate, and the first one will always be the green one, also known as a volatile ooze.
Okay.
This ad will target a random raid member and immobilize them. It will then move towards the player at great speed.
13.
The A-bomb's second ability is...
So there's a green side of the room where Rotface was, and there is an orange side of the room where Festergut was. And these sides of the room will spawn ads back and forth, that do different things, and you need to manage them differently. One is called Gas Cloud, and the other one's called Unstable Ooze. The Unstable Ooze, well, I'll let him say it.
Is to slow the ooze by 50% for 20 seconds, but it also costs 50 ooze energy. These ads must be killed, because if they reach their target, they will explode for significant damage, as well as do a knockaway.
Yeah.
Should this happen, right before it is about to hit, stack up on that person as the damage is split between the number of people it hits. It will then pick a new target as well.
So he kind of runs past it. Let's watch one of the oozes be managed here.
2 random raid members.
We'll skip back forward.
One player, preferably one of the Oz tanks as they have very little to do until...
So green's always first.
Will run to the table and drink a potion to become an A-bomb. The A-bomb will deal constant AoE damage to the raid, but it is also the only way to prevent...
There it is. Okay, so here's the green ooze. It's targeting somebody, and when it targets them, it roots them in place. That's how the green one works. So you need to kill it before it reaches that person, or else it will blow up and do a bunch of damage. That's the goal. Now, whether or not you can do that is going to be not necessarily obvious, but if you stack the damage of the explosion once the ooze reaches you is split amongst everybody that hits. So the entire raid can stack on the person so that when it reaches them, it will blow up and split the damage that it doesn't one-shot anybody. However, the problem with that is that it can target somebody that it just popped and immediately turn to them and explode also. So you don't want to do it too often. You don't want to leave them up. You really want to kill them as fast as you can, or else the oozes are really going to get kind of difficult. Yeah, and you want to get everybody knocked in the same direction. Thank you, Bora. Because if everybody gets knocked in the same direction, then the ooze is coming towards you guys still, and you can shoot it, right? But if you're knocked like this way and the ooze is heading this way, then you're out of range and you can't DPS it. So you'll be like, okay, everybody stack here as the ooze is coming towards us, and then we're all going to get knocked that way instead of being around it and getting knocked in a bunch of different directions. Because if it does reach someone again, you want to be on top of them like the plan dictates. Okay, so that's the green one.
Prevent the puddles from completely filling the room, as the A-bomb's primary ability is to drink the puddles.
There it is. So watch, it's going to reach it and pop.
Too fast, as you need to let them get big enough to get at least 13 drinks off in order to help counter Putricide's next ability.
And again, the A-bomb with enough energy can slow the ooze, which helps you greatly in killing it.
Putricide will cast Unstable Experiment right before he is about to spawn one of two types of ads.
Here's the orange one now.
They always alternate, and the first one will always be the green one, also known as a volatile ooze.
Now, the orange one doesn't root you, so you can kite it around, which makes it a lot easier. The orange one's much simpler.
This ad will target a random raid member and immobilize.
This is the volatile ooze.
Becomes 50 ooze energy. These ads must be killed, because if they reach their target, they will
He's still talking about the volatile ooze.
Damage, as well as do a knockaway.
Does the orange one just kill you if it touches you?
Right before it is about to hit, stack up on that person as the damage
It's raid wipe if it reaches
the number
you.
Of people
Okay.
it hits.
Ignore this for now.
It will then pick a new target as well. You can still cast and perform all your normal abilities while targeted.
Okay, so the orange one, if it reaches you, you die, so you have to kite it around. So at 80%, on normal, he will stun the entire raid like this. On heroic, if I'm not mistaken, he spawns one of each ad during this transition. So he comes over here and he drinks a potion to get all fucked up. He'll get all crazier. But while he's doing that, the raid has to kill one of each, which can get complicated. You'd rather be stunned on the transition because it's chill. On heroic, you're killing both at the same time, which can be kind of spoopy.
This includes Vanish, Divine Shield, Ice Block, and Feign Death. All of which will cause the...
Right, and then you get the debuff. So does that only happen at 80%? So there's a debuff that the entire raid gets, either orange or green, and depending on which one you have, you can only DPS one of the two. So the raid is split on which of the ads that they can DPS. So you're like, okay, I'm orange. If you're orange, can you DPS orange? Or if you're orange, you DPS green? Either way, you can only DPS one of them. So that definitely changes how you... Okay, if you're orange, you DPS orange. How you operate in here.
Ooze to cast on a new target and immobilize them instead.
Yeah, this fight will have a lot of Fuji stuff.
By moving to the left side of the room, or the orange side, as the green will always spawn on the right. As soon as it becomes targetable, we have all of our warlocks, mages, and hunters move to max range and begin killing it.
Okay, so regardless of what we were just talking about, to kill the volatile ooze, they move the entire raid to the orange side so that it spawns over here and then starts running towards the raid. When you're on orange side, the whole raid moves to the right, spawns over here, goes over to here. Although right now, they're about to spawn a gas cloud.
Should it target one of those hunters, mages, or warlocks that are
here comes a
by,
green.
The mages can blink away.
So watch.
The warlocks can use their portal.
Here, so it targeted somebody in looks like melee range.
Make sure it does not blow up on.
So now the whole raid is swapping to the ooze.
One additional note:
this guy's rooted. He can't really do much.
And the knockaway occurs. Do not run back in right away.
And
start running away at first until it picks a new target.
And it did hit
sure
the person, but then it died immediately. So now that the green one's dead, they're moving back to the orange side.
He will spawn a gas cloud. This is not actually a cloud, however. It is simply another type of ooze, also known as the orange slime. The A-bomb must also slow these types of ads as well. Gas clouds will debuff a random raid.
So this guy got debuffed.
Gaseous bloat.
He's running.
The stack will tick down every 2 seconds, and when it ticks off completely, it will stop and target a new player and chase them instead now. Should it reach the player,
the gas cloud ticked off of him, but they killed it.
How many stacks are left on the person it hits?
So they're moving back and forth, so that they're away from where the ad is going to spawn as it spawns.
Being chased by this ad, we have all ranged immediately begin to attack instead of just the 3 classes mentioned before. with melee following as soon as it picks a target. Melee should be ready to switch off as soon as the person chased has around 2 stacks left, as you do not want to get targeted as soon as it switches off. The person being chased needs heavy heals during this time, as the debuff deals significant damage. Also, because you can move while being chased by the gas cloud, notice we do not move nearly as far to the right side of the room as we do the left. This is simply for control purposes. This makes the A-bomb's job noticeably easier as it has less ground to cover, as well as having the puddles much closer together if not always on top of each other. Neither of these adds can target Putricide's main aggro target, and both abilities persist into Phase 2, but not Phase 3.
Okay, so it's important. The oozes won't target the main tank, which is nice. And in Phase 3, which, if I'm honest, Phase 3 is going to be the easy part, guys, the oozes stop spawning. So you just have to get through 70% of the fight, and you'll be fine. They're at 50%, and they are, I don't know how long, 5 minutes in.
At 80% and 35%, Putricide will cast Tear Gas. This will stun everything in the room for 20 seconds. This includes gas clouds and volatile oozes.
Cheat spot? Oh, yeah?
Because of that, it is much more important to push when there are no slime puddles up.
If you push him while he's spawning orange, he spawns 1 orange and 1 green, not an extra. Like, he won't spawn 2 oranges. We'll see what the scripting is on it. I know that some people have talked about different servers in the past, have different scripting on exactly how that works, but there will definitely be a preferred way to spawn the oozes with the transition. And again, when on heroic, the transition doesn't stun you. It just spawns a set of both oozes,
as opposed to waiting till just after one of the ads is killed.
Yes, Retro Burster. There is a debuff called Unbound Plague. Thank you, Bora. It's actually not that big a deal. It's a 60-second debuff. It's a dot that applies a stack that increases the damage you take from the dot over time. But if you get near somebody, it will give them the dot, but you keep your stacks of increased damage taken from the dot. Now, the increased damage taken only applies to the dot itself, not from anything else. So you get the dot, you run out of like melee range, and you just stand there and let it tick for a bit, and then someone comes over and just takes the dot from you, and then you run away. And you've got a few stacks of the thing. He's building stacks of the thing. Someone else comes over and takes it from them. And then once the dot expires, you're chill. Now, what they're saying is in 25-man, the dot's not that big a deal because there's a lot of people that you can pass it around to. On 10-man, it might stack up and be a bit spookier. But in my experience, that dot is not necessarily something to worry too much about. Min-maxing it too hard isn't going to be super important.
Communicate if you are close to a transition and have DPS stop around 83. Have the A-bomb eat the clouds and push Phase 2. Should an
so here comes the stun
80 or
from the A-bomb, or the slow,
ignore it,
whatever.
Burn the boss
Everybody's
to the
turning towards it.
And simply have the person hold on.
He also does these bouncing oozes. So if you see these oozes bouncing towards you, you have to move or you take damage. I don't know if you can necessarily fully ignore it, Buckets, but I don't think it's necessarily something that needs to be like super min-maxed to fix the fight.
Off on the slow until the tear gas ends. He'll gain
So do I think
abilities
PTR will
in
come
Phase
out
2.
soon? I sure as shit hope so, man.
The first is the choking gas trap. He will drop 2 traps in melee range that look like orange flasks.
Okay, see these things? These are the choking gas bombs. You do not want to be near them.
Anyone who walks over them will receive a 75% hit reduction debuff for 15 seconds.
75% hit reduction
15
for
to 20 seconds after they are dropped, they will explode for 15k damage and knock back anyone within 10 yards.
And they do a bunch of damage if you're close when
It
they
will
pop.
also give them another 75% hit reduction debuff, this time for 20 seconds.
Not good.
The second is Malleable Goo. This is the ranged equivalent to the choking traps. As long as there are enough people at ranged, Putricide will pick 2 random people at range and hurl 2 bouncy balls at them.
Bouncy balls.
They have a decent travel time and they always travel in a straight line, so they are decently easy to avoid.
Decent.
When it lands, anyone in the area will get hit for about 15k damage and have attack and casting speed slowed by 200%.
That's bad. Healers, you have to
Phase
keep your
2
eyes
just
up and avoid
continues
it.
back and forth of the two different types of ads being killed, and avoiding the two new types of traps, while the A-bomb continues to drink up all the green puddles until 35. Melee should not try to milk extra boss damage after a green ad has spawned.
Okay, so if you notice, his HP is like about 30% or 35%. They're not pushing it until they're ready. So they want to clean up the ads, make sure the room is empty of ooze.
If it targets you, most likely you will be stunned between two orange traps.
Here we go, 35%, we're about to
Trap
phase.
damage, combined with the ad exploding, will most likely kill everyone nearby should the ad not die before reaching that melee.
This is not something that you're going to see on Heroic.
Should this happen, let the ad explode on the person and GS the person, letting him take all the damage from the ad.
I'm sorry, GS a person? That's not an ability that we have these days.
Instead of risking other people. Likewise, do not kite the boss through ranged, because there is a chance that Malleable Goo will target a melee if you do this, having the same effect. At 35%, as I said before, another tear gas will go out. The ads will stop, but the puddles, traps, and goo will all still need to be avoided. He will also begin hitting much harder and much faster, as he gains a buff called Mutated Strength. So
phase 3 is essentially a soften rage. He trucks hard as fuck, and then oozes spawn all around the room, and you don't have an A-bomb to drink them. So you really need to kill him before the oozes take over the whole room and the raid wipes to damage.
The tank should run to the door opposite the table to get as far away from Putricide at the beginning of the phase as possible. Those few extra seconds of DPS time proved invaluable in this kill. The reason you use 3 tanks is because the mutated plague disease that he puts on the tanks is just as much of a soft and rage timer as running out of room from the puddles. Should it fall off for any reason, including tank death, bubbling it off, and surprisingly, even when it will just fall off the tank naturally, it will heal him for 1.7 million per stack that the tank had.
Cool. I didn't know about
5
this.
stacks, the tank will be AoEing the raid for about 12 to 15
yeah.
damage a second. And to make sure that
That's
at no
big.
time did a tank debuff fall off and heal him,
Devo, thanks for the tier 1.
the very first transition, each tank got 2 stacks.
Okay, so he applies this debuff that if the debuff falls off, it heals him. So the tanks need to taunt so that they're continuously getting more debuffs so the debuffs don't fall off, but the tank does damage to everybody around them the more debuffs they have. So it's a soft and rage because you can't do too much damage to the raid, but the debuffs can't fall off, so you're just slowly building damage on the raid and trying to keep these debuffs up. If you die, it's a wipe, yeah.
When the third tank had 2 stacks, I taunted again.
Hi, Jux.
When I got my third, the next tank taunted. And then when the third tank had 3, I taunted again. At that point, we were just hoping the boss would be dead before all tanks had 4 stacks. None of us wanted to get a 5th.
Raid
Thanks for
damage
watching this movie.
looks
As
chill.
always, feel free to ask questions or add suggestions.
I don't know,
on
Nesby.
YouTube or in the strategy thread at tankspot.com. Good luck.
It seems like a really fun fight. A lot of mechanics, a lot of little things. The mechanic of only being able to DPS certain colors of oozes is going to be interesting to manage. This will be one of those fights that if you get it early, you're on track for a full clear quick. Yeah, this is normal. It'll be a fun fight. Debuff lasts 3 minutes. It seemed like it lasted less here. Maybe it's a normal mechanic where it lasts less. This fight and Arthas, I think, are probably the ones that I'm mostly looking forward to. So that's Professor Putricide. Definitely one of the fights that I'm most looking forward to. It's going to be difficult. Difficult is okay. It's okay for stuff to be hard. He's got a great series of voice lines. He's got a great progression curve, I think, because there's 3 phases, and the third phase is like this frantic, fun, like craziness. So that's going to be fun to like start to prog on. So that is the Plague Wing. Next, we're going to do the 2 bosses in the Blood Wing, and that will be it for today. Blood Prince Council. Okay, so Blood Princes is the first fight in the Blood Wing, one of 2. I also would consider it probably on the harder end, only because there's a lot of mechanics going on at once. And so, you know, a lot of the fights are it's like, here's a mechanic, here's a mechanic, here's a mechanic, here's a mechanic, and you learn them all one at a time. Whereas this fight, there's like, here's 10 mechanics, And you have to learn all of them or you wipe off the rip because there's a bunch of mobs and they all do different stuff.
ICECROWN Raid Guide. My name is Darksend, and in this video I will be covering our strategy for the Blood Prince Council, the first boss in the Crimson Hall. If you'd like more information or would like to learn more about downloading this movie, click more info on the movie information box on YouTube to head directly to Tankspot. The Blood Prince encounter is not your typical council mechanic. Of the 3 princes, Volinar, Keleseth, and Tal'Daram, only Volinar will have any health at the beginning of the pull.
Yeah, so there are 3 princes, and only one of them at any given time is able to be DPS. The other 2 are just like drained or husks.
Attacking either of the other 2 will not actually contribute to defeating the encounter. This is because of the invocation of
Cleave
blood.
bad.
This ability both marks the target you need to actively be killing, as well as empowering that prince. Every prince has one ability that can be empowered. For Volinar, it is Shock Vortex. For Tal'Daram, it is Conjured Flame. And for Keleseth, it is Shadowlands. Shock Vortex will target a random raid member and cast a vortex on the ground under them. As a ranged DPS or healer, try to position yourself so there is never one directly between yourself and Tal'Daram. I'll discuss why in a moment.
Where is the shock vortexes? Do you see them?
The empowered Shock Vortex summons a vortex on every raid member within 30 yards.
Okay. So, Shock Vortex generally, when he's not empowered, will place it on the ground. Swirling on the right. Okay, over here. When it's an empowered Shock Vortex, everybody gets one on top of them, and they need to move away from everybody before it pops. It's a very retail-like mechanic. You're going to blow up, so you want to be away from everybody, and then boom, and then you go back in once it pops.
The empowered Shock Vortex summons a vortex on every raid member within 30 yards. Because of this, ranged and healers need to either be spread out or more than 30 yards away from him. Melee need to begin running out as soon as it begins casting. Make sure to not all run out the same way, and have people run out to different distances to ensure they do not blow each other up.
So that's Shock Vortex.
This version of the ability does not persist on the ground like the normal version.
These are the regular ones.
The empowered flame has stacks that must be siphoned off.
Okay, so this is the empowered flame, right? So it builds up this big fireball, right? Are you completely screwed if a bomb goes off? Yeah, I would say, from my experience, not completely screwed, but it's not good. So there's 2 versions of this thing.
Once it picks a target, have that person begin running away from the raid while everyone else stacks underneath the orb.
This is the most important version. So this is the empowered version, right? When one of the prince who casts it is empowered. He summons this big fireball, and he will target someone, and it will start running towards them. And if it reaches them, it does a fuck ton of damage. But while it's running towards them, it will fire little fireballs at people that are near it. And for each little fireball that it fires, the ball gets smaller, and when it does reach the person, it does way less damage. So you're just like siphoning off damage from the explosion as it runs to the person until it gets to them, and then it's weak enough that it won't one-shot them. Pallias can Divine Shield and don't have to run away? Okay, interesting.
Target. Have that person begin running away from the raid while everyone else stacks underneath the orb.
That's why this whole raid is running.
Everyone within 10 yards for 1k damage a second. This flare is what removes the stacks from the orb. Once enough flares have gone off, the orb detonating will do non-empowered damage.
Okay, so this is a non-empowered sphere, right? So this is not important to soak. It's just once it reaches the person, it needs to get healed.
Should a full-strength orb go off, it will instantly kill everyone within 15 yards.
Do you need raid frames for this raid? Tom, I would encourage you to get raid frames, period, forever.
This is why you do not want a vortex between you and Tal'Daram. As the raid will not be able to follow the orb through the vortex, it will hit you at full strength. Keleseth never melees, but instead spams Shadowlands the entire.
So the final one, Keleseth, he's like a caster. He's like, what's her name from Kael'thas, the lady who does Shadow Bolts that you need to tank as a warlock. And the Shadow Bolts do a bunch of damage. Capernian, thank you.
Because of this.
So if you see what's happening is there are these shadow clouds, and the tank for the caster, Keleseth, has threat on these shadow clouds, and they're hitting him, and when they're near him, they are reducing the amount of shadow damage that he takes.
We use a warlock to tank him.
So that's what's happening
It
here.
easiest to just have the lock pre-positioned in the back of the room, and have Keleseth MD'd to him. Keleseth also summons orbs called Dark Nucleus.
Okay, and then there's these... No, that's
These
different.
adds will channel a debuff from the highest aggro target called Shadow Resonance. It will deal minor periodic damage, but will reduce the shadow damage taken by the person by 35%. And its stack.
Would demo be better because of 20% DR? It's possible, Ice Coffee. You're still going to want to keep your Felguard on the current kill target, but yeah, demos are very beefy.
This is how you cancel the Empower. To be safe, our Warlock tank tried to always have 3 of them on him, but he usually had more.
So if the Warlock is tanking and Keleseth gets empowered and he doesn't have a bunch of those shadow damage reduction stacks on him from those little shadow clouds, he's gonna die. Fortunately, the first one to get empowered isn't him, but he does need to get those quickly. I think you probably like in Searing Pain or dot them to get threat, but you don't want to kill them because you want the stacks of damage reduction on you.
The catch is, they tick themselves out.
Rank 1 Searing Pain? That's enough? Okay.
The final ability in this encounter is the Kinetic Bomb.
Okay, so these kinetic bombs.
These bombs will float around the room, and at times there will be multiple up at once. If they hit the ground, they will explode and knock back everyone in the room for a decent distance.
Since you ever hit them last, okay.
To keep them from hitting the ground, simply hit them with some form of direct damage, and it will fly back up. They will eventually despawn after a short time of being juggled. We had a range with assist, marking each one so people could keep track of which one they were assigned.
Okay, so around the room, these red balls that will go up and down will spawn, right? And if they hit the ground, they explode and do a bajillion damage to everyone around. The thing about them is that you can do damage to them and you will send them back up. So it like you could juggle them. There is some ability for maybe a hunter pet to sit on them or, whatever. There's a lot of little ways to do it and they need to get assigned. Yeah, Foji auto marker for sure. They need to get assigned to people in order to be managed correctly. You'd be like, okay, I'm on X. I'm going to manage this one. Depending on your class or how to do it, you may not have to be on it full time, but it cannot hit the ground. I don't necessarily know exactly how it works. I know that in the past, people have put pets on them and pets work. They just sit on them and even if it's floating up here, the pet can still attack at the bottom and you're safe. But, there's a lot of ways to go about it.
When Valinar gets empowered a second time, he almost immediately started casting Empowered Vortex.
It looks like there's
Make sure
a
melee
boar
are
on
aware
it or
as we
something.
wiped
Oh, it's
our
a
previous
wolf.
attempt to several melee getting blown up at the exact same point as in this video. The reason for that was that the old Empower does not stop casting when the invocation switches. And as such, we had both an Empowered Flame Orb and an Empowered Shock Vortex go out at exactly the same time.
That's gnarly.
This may be a bug with the encounter, but don't count on it. Be aware of this.
On Heroic, there's a few small additions to what he was talking about. They do Shadow Prison, which binds someone. Movement by a bound enemy inflicts damage, increasing by 500 for each second of movement. Remaining motionless for 10 seconds will reset the stack. So everybody gets this debuff, right? Is this everybody at once? I can't remember. It's everybody. Okay. So if you move, you start taking damage. So the goal of the fight would be to do all of that stuff while also not moving ever, which sounds a bit difficult. Yeah, melee should not be... It's the opposite of Hodier. You do not want to be pressing, your strafe keys. Don't Q and E all over the place. That's kind of a cool... I like that. That's kind of fun. That is Blood Prince. That seems like a very fun fight. There's a lot going on. It's definitely going to be one of those fights that I think you're going to be like, oh, we wiped in 10 seconds. Oh, we wiped in 20 seconds. Oh, we wiped in 30 seconds. Oh, we killed the boss. Because it's going to be a lot of like learning the mechanics and how to do them. And then once everyone knows how to do their job, they'll fall over. But it's going to take a while for everybody to understand each one of their roles. And then once all the roles are mastered, the boss will just die. Which is kind of cool. Short wipes I like more than long wipes. Like, 8-minute wipes definitely suck a lot. But it's going to be a fun fight to learn because very quickly you'll know what you have to do. Because it's going to be in your face right off the rip. Yeah, council bosses are always a mess. Remember Illidari Council early on? The first few pulls, you're like, what the fuck is happening? There's too much going on. But then, boom, it's over. Once all of the white mechanics are handled, and then, it's over. Okay, so that is Blood Prince. Once we get through this fight, you can go up the ramp to Blood Queen Lana'thel, which is one of the fights, the blood infusion that you need for Shadowmourne. The other one being Putricide and Sindragosa, which we'll do tomorrow. Putricide, if you're doing Shadowmourne, you need to be in the A-bomb, which means that your off tank needs to do something else, which will be annoying. All right, Blood Queen Lana'thel. I actually think this fight is one of the easier fights in here. If you want to get the Shadowmourne thing, you need to bite 3 people and you get the whatchamacallit. This is also one of those fights that I'm 99.9% sure Warcraft Logs is going to normalize your bite buff. Tell me I'm wrong, but I'm sure that they've been talking about it. I don't know this fight super well, so let's get into it and we can learn about it together.
25-man normal version of the Blood Queen Lana'thel encounter. Blood Queen Lana'thel has both a very large health pool and a very restrictive enrage timer. To overcome this, you'll need to make efficient use of her Essence of the Blood Queen debuff. Shortly into the fight, she'll bite the highest non-tank on her threat list, dealing around 12,000 damage and afflicting them with Essence of the Blood Queen.
Okay, so you want certain people to get bit. So you will very likely be dumping MDs and tricks into certain people while the tank still needs to be on top. So this is one of those fights where you want to look very closely at what your threat meters are and make sure that you are properly managing that.
This causes the bitten player to deal 100%.
Every class is going to argue for themselves here. I'm not going to get into who the best person to be bitten is.
Increased damage, heal themselves for 10% of their damage, and cause no threat. Ideally, you want your highest melee DPS to be bitten first, as she'll run across the room to bite a ranged player, wasting valuable DPS time. Essence of the Blood Queen lasts for 60 seconds, at which point it will be replaced with Frenzied Bloodthirst. Once this happens, the player's action bar will be completely emptied except for Vampiric Bite, the same ability Lana'thel uses. Players affected by Frenzied Bloodthirst have 10 seconds to use that ability to bite another player, thereby passing the essence onto the other player as well as refreshing their own. This has a cascading effect as the fight continues. Once another 60 seconds are up, both players will then have to bite new targets, leaving 4 players with essence. Eventually those 4 will have to bite 4 more, leaving 8, and so on. Should a player with Frenzied Bloodthirst not bite anyone within the 10-second timer, they will be mind-controlled and must be killed. This is a very bad thing. Not only do you lose that player's DPS, you have to waste valuable time killing them and have one less player spreading the essence debuff. For those reasons, failing even one bite practically guarantees a wipe unless you significantly outgear the DPS requirement. It's also important to note that everyone has to bite someone different. Aside from the need to spread the essence to all the DPS you can, the Vampiric Bite ability does not work on someone who has already been bitten. Since it's quite likely, especially in the latter portions of the fight, for 2 players to choose the same person, it's very helpful to set up a bite order ahead of time.
Yeah, okay. So, this is one of those fights that your DPS might start kind of slow and then accelerate later in the fight because of the buff. And 2, you want to set up a bite order. So it's like one person bites one person and then they both have the buff. Then 2 people bite 2 more people, and then 4 people have the buff. And then 4 people bite 8 people, and then 8 people have or 4 people, then it's 8 people, then it's 16, and then you're kind of fucked. So you kind of want to be done by then-ish. It's the raid buff pyramid scheme, correct? So if you're DPS, you very likely will get the debuff. You also will likely be like, okay, I'm going to bite the AF Warlock, or I'm going to bite Olive's here. Olive wants to bite too. I'm gonna bite the Fury Warrior or whatever it is. Like you're assigned a person to bite. So that's one part of the fight. That part's not really that complicated. If you have a plan going in about who you're gonna be biting, you should be pretty good. Just make sure that you get that bite off ahead of time. After 10 seconds, if you haven't bit anybody, you get mind controlled.
Make sure to prioritize higher DPS players to be bitten earlier. Communication is important as well. Players will need to know where the person they're biting is ahead of time, and if they don't, they need to find out quickly. The raid's positioning is very important here. All of your ranged DPS and healers will need to be as spread out as possible, preferably at least 6 yards away from each other, with the healers more toward the center of the room to make sure everyone's in range. This is due to Lana'thel's Twilight Bloodbolt ability. She'll randomly cast this on any non-tank, causing around 10,000 damage to the target and anyone too close to them. Limiting this splash damage on ranged classes is important. However, she can target melee with Blood Bolt, resulting in unavoidable splash damage on the rest of the melee. For this reason, we have our melee DPS split into 2 separate groups to the left and right of the boss. Every 2 minutes, Lana'thel will run to the center of the room, fear everyone for a short period of time, and start casting Blood Bolt.
This is such a cool ability.
This is essentially just her normal Blood Bolt ability, cast 3 times on every member of the raid. Positioning can be even more difficult here. Aside from the fact that the fear just completely scrambled everyone's positioning, all of the melee DPS needs to expand as well.
Okay. So every so often she'll target somebody and cast a splash shadow bolt type thing, and you need to make sure that you're spread out to avoid the splash. Also, the melee are in 2 stacks so that not everybody gets splashed at the same time. Every 2 minutes, she'll run to the center of the room, fly up, cast this big damage ability so that you probably, when you'll use your D-Sacks, your AM Shadows, your Divine Hymns, stuff like that, so as to prevent a lot of that damage going out. But it seems like she also stops doing a lot of her other mechanics during that, so it's at least telegraphed of where the damage is going, and it shouldn't be too dangerous because you'll have planned for it.
The fear makes it almost impossible to set positioning ahead of time, so everyone just needs to find an open area using as much of the room as possible. Since everyone is being hit by Blood Bolt simultaneously, 2 people standing too close to each other will take upward of 20,000 damage instantly. Healing is extremely tight during this phase, so any hybrid DPS that can't damage her while she's in the air should try to help out on healing. It can also be...
I'd be willing to bet it's not that tight. That's just me. D-Sack, AM Shadow, Divine Hymn, Chain Heal, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be fine. Look, I mean, look at the frames.
He can target melee with Blood Bolt, resulting in unavoidable splash damage on the rest of the melee. For this reason, we have our melee DPS split into 2 separate groups to the left and right of the boss. Every 2 minutes, Lana'thel will run to the center of the room, fear everyone for a short period of time, and start casting Blood Bolt Whirl. This is essentially just her normal Blood Bolt ability, cast 3 times on every member of the raid. Positioning can be even more difficult here. Aside from the fact that the fear just completely scrambled everyone's positioning, all of them...
The fear will be the one mechanic that could screw you, sure. If you accidentally get feared in a bad spot, then yeah, you might get fucked. But you're probably going to be fine.
Melee DPS needs to expand as well.
Oh my god, is this a human racial situation? Alliance is getting some bias here?
The fear makes it almost impossible to set positioning ahead of time, so everyone just needs to find an open area using as much of the room as possible. Since everyone is being hit by Blood Bolt simultaneously, 2 people standing too close to each other will take upward of 20,000 damage instantly. Healing is extremely tight during this phase, so any hybrid DPS that can't damage her while she's in the air should try to help out on healing. It can also be very helpful to have healers avoid or break the fear with things like Fear Ward or Tremor Totem, and let them pick a spot quickly while the rest of the raid works around them.
Fear Ward Master Spell,
One final warning regarding the air phase. The timing...
What you could probably do, and I wonder if Bop works too, but you Fear Ward your priest, the raid's kind of within the green circle of the Master Spell. Boom, everybody Master Spells, and then they run to their pre-assigned spots. Maybe even with boots, stuff like that.
The Essence debuff falling off tends to line up very closely with the first fear going out. Quite often, bites will need to go out as she's running to the center of the room.
Tremor is not the most reliable of abilities here. I don't remember how Tremor works these days, but my shamans are like, oh, wasn't that a nice tick? And they try to time it. And sometimes the timing doesn't work, and it's sad. And so they definitely do their best to time it better, but it doesn't always work great.
Tanking her as far from the center as possible can give a little extra time to get bites out, as well as making sure the first player with Essence gets their first bite out instantly as well. There are 4 other main abilities that will need to be dealt with, though they're fortunately much simpler. Pact of the Darkfallen links 3 raid members together with a bright purple beam. While it's active, all 3 players will be constantly exploding, causing shadow damage to anyone else who is nearby. In order to cancel Pact of the Darkfallen...
Okay, so it's a fucking triangle. Three people get this beam on them, and they make a triangle. In order for the debuff to fall off and them to stop blowing up and doing damage to anyone around them, yeah, it's the opposite of Mother Shiraz, exactly. They have to stack, and the debuff will fall off. So this is a good opportunity to use your boots here, to get close to each other.
Fallen, the 3 players must stand directly on top of each other for a brief period of time.
Boom.
Since latency causes players to appear in different places to each other, we found it best to simply have everyone with Pact go stand on the blue diamond on the floor in the center of the room until their debuff falls off. The next ability, Swarming Shadows, is practically identical to the lead.
Swarming Shadows is super easy. It's Jiraxxus. If you get it, you run out, and that's it.
Legion Flame debuff from the Lord Jiraxxus encounter. Just kite it away, preferably to the edges of the room, and stay out of the purple fire. There's also her Blood Mirror ability. She casts this on the tank, who is then linked to the person standing closest to them. The linked player then takes 100% of the damage the tank does as unresistible shadow damage. The simplest way to deal with this is to simply have a second tank stand on top of the first. However, the only thing that really matters is the other player's health pool and damage reduction. If your healers can keep them up, a DPS spec player with a full set of tanking gear can work as well, while potentially contributing more damage to the fight.
I misunderstood. How does Blood Mirror work? I don't remember this mechanic. Let's look it up. I wanna read the thing. Blood Mirror. 100% damage done to you is dealt to the linked source. This affects the person closest to the tank. Okay. You can just manage who it goes on by having somebody stack on the thing. I gotcha. Okay. See.
Finally, there's her Shroud of Sorrow aura. This causes up to 4,500 damage to everyone in the raid every 3 seconds and must be healed through. Prayer of Shadow Protection.
Random shadow damage going out over time, fine.
Or a Shadow Protection aura help greatly with this, as well as most of her other abilities.
Can you bubble it? It looks like it's just a constant amount of shadow damage. It's always out, Sword Omen. It's just always doing double damage. One to the tank, one to another person who's closest to the tank.
Blood Queen Lana'thel is an extremely tight DPS and healing check that will test your ability to execute strategies quickly and efficiently. As always, if you'd like more information on this or any other encounter, just head over to tankspot.com and click the movies link in the top nav bar. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just follow the link.
Raina, I think it's just whoever's closest at the time. So the main tank and off tank should just always be stacked on top of each other, period. And the off tank probably uses something like, resistance flask or whatever. Okay, so this fight, I think, is probably one of those fights that is initially kind of overwhelming because there's a lot of mechanics happening, but none of the mechanics are that dangerous so long as all of them kind of are handled quickly and early. There's the triangle mechanic, there's the bite mechanic, there's the dropping the shadow shit on the ground, there's watching your threat and knowing who's next to get a bit, stuff like that. And so a lot of little things spreading out during the blood bolt spray. It's one of those things where you will see everybody die quickly because they don't know what they're doing and they're going to blow up the raid because they're not going to move towards each other when they get the triangle beam and stuff like that. But once they know what they're doing, it's all going to click. Everyone will be pumping like crazy because they're going to be getting bit and loving it. Like, okay, let's look at DPS numbers here. The Fury Warrior is at 20k. Fury Warrior's at 20k, guys. Are Fury Warriors good yet? This guy might be. The Mage is at 16k. Rogue's at 14.5. I'm sure it can go way higher than that. It'll be a fun fight. Everyone's gonna, get major boners when their DPS goes through the roof. And that is the end of the Bloodwing. We're gonna do Dreamwalker. We're gonna be doing Sindragosa, and we're gonna be doing the Lich King tomorrow at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern.